All right, so Christian, I had a couple questions where if you have an athlete come in the door, and I personally view you as like this hypertrophy guru, as like the guru of all things that somebody might have, like some athlete has an issue, they can go to you, you
Yeah,
could solve it.
a problem fixer.
You what?
A problem fixer.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
It's funny you
And
mention that because I think that there are essentially two different types of coaches, right? You have those who are great with programming. I mean, when I look at your stuff, I mean, you are so structured and you analyze data and stuff and so on and so forth. And you can plan very well for multi-years development. Okay,
yeah.
my brain doesn't work like that. I work in terms of 4 weeks. Give me 4 weeks and we'll figure it out. So that's
Yeah, that's
two different but complementary type of coaching.
yeah, so that sets it up where it's like, okay, so I was gonna say you get a high school kid or a collegiate kid who's a football player. They come to you. Where do you start? Like, where do you start? Just like breaking them down and figuring out where you want to go with it, because that's like something that I mean, really, I've been thinking about this since we talked during COVID.
Yeah. Well, first, I think that what I need to know is the style of football they're playing, the type of player they are, and what tools they need to excel at their style. Like, for example, and that's something that is not talked about. People say, well, you are a football player, you are a linebacker, this is what you need. You need this level of strength, this level of vertical jump, speed, agility, and so on and so forth. But I believe that, the way you play the game. Are you more of a scraper side to sideline? Are you more of a downtown guy like you
Downhill.
just go back and forward? Are you a plugger? Are you something that's someone who's very physical? Are you someone who was more in coverage? The way you play the game dictates the tools you need to be good at. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
that's the first thing I want to know. What kind of player are you? And I will talk to the player, but also the coach. So, this player, what is his style of playing, and what tools, what physical tools does he need to be better at his style? The problem is that oftentimes we train people with a general idea of what the sport or the position requires, and that might not be what this athlete needs to excel at his sport. I remember I was training this hockey player, and that's a mistake I made when I was younger. And he said, "Well,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be like I'm a power forward. I'm 6'2". I want to be bigger." So I made him bigger. I mean, he gained like 35 pounds, but that completely killed his game because now he had no speed, and his game was based on speed and hands ability. Now he was bigger, but he lost because he could not move as well just because we just focus on adding stuff. Now, it's still possible to make him just as agile and fast at that size, but the time we took to build the size is time we did not take to build agility and speed, which is what is playing style required. And I think that as strength coaches, we tend to focus a bit too much on strength, which is certainly needed. But with most sports, I would say that the style of playing that the athlete plays, what they need the most is probably agility and speed. And strength is certainly a part of that, and injury prevention is certain part of that. But the first thing I'm looking at is, okay, this is your style of play. These are the physical tools you need to excel. And let's look at where you're at right now in those qualities and to see what is my priority. Because I tend to focus more on concentrated loading, where I will focus on very few motor capacities at the same time, maximize them, then we move on to something else. So yeah, that would be the first thing I'm looking at. I would also obviously look at strength ratios. I would look at body type. I'm a big believer in the body type affecting exercises selection. So, for example, okay, there are two things that I feel are neglected when you analyze a player and or an athlete. And really, I think that with those two things alone, you're going to have a very good idea of where your training is going to go. The first one is going to be levers. So, do you have longer arms, longer limbs versus shorter torso? Do you have a longer torso, shorter limbs? Because that will require a different emphasis in training. someone with shorter limbs, for example, will probably be a natural squatter, will probably be a natural bench presser. So pushing those numbers up might not translate that well to sporting performance because, well, they're just naturally good at them. You're going to need to invest more in posterior chain work. If you have longer limbs, you will be more quad dominant. So you need to invest more in posterior chain, glutes, and so on and so forth. If you have longer limbs, it's going to be a different training strategy. So that's the first thing I'm looking at. Second thing would be the type, the dominance. Is the person more muscle dominant or elastic dominant? So how do they produce speed or power? Are they producing speed and power mostly through a muscular contraction or muscular voluntary effort? Or is it more elastic and reflexive? Okay, because that's going to affect your training. Someone who is naturally reflexive, like is a very elastic athlete, a guy who can be extremely fast, extremely agile, without being super muscular. They can even be very strong without carrying that much muscle mass because they can use a stretch reflex so efficiently. Now, these guys will be able to do a much higher volume of plyometrics because they use the stretch reflex so efficiently that the muscles and nervous system are not overloaded as much. If you take a muscular athlete who produces speed and agility mostly through muscle strength, then plyometric exercises for them is a much higher stress. So they cannot do the same amount of volume in that regard. But if you look at lifting, it's going to be the opposite. An athlete who is elastic by nature, when you put him in a scenario when they have to produce maximum force, maximum contractile strength, then that's going to take a lot out of them because that's not their forte. If you take the muscular athlete, they can do a lot more volume of lifting, a lot more frequency of lifting. Like for example, I have a sprinter, and for him, he started to have real progress in strength when we decreased strength work to twice per week. Because more than that, he just didn't recover unless we use minimal volume. Now, some athletes will be the opposite. They can handle the volume, and you should take advantage of that because they can do it more. Same thing for example, when I'm programming complexes, because I do work a lot in complexes. If these complexes involve mostly explosive movements, then the elastic athlete don't need to rest as long. Because when doing plyometrics work or speed work or agility work, he uses mostly elastic energy. So you're using a lot less calories, a lot less energy, a lot less muscular effort, a lot less neurological effort to do the same work. Same thing with speed. They can do more sprints. They can do more reps on sprinting because they spend less energy doing it than an athlete who will produce speed mostly through muscular contractions. So these two things will give me a clue about which muscles or which movement pattern do I need to emphasize. So if I have shorter limbs, I'm probably going to go with a back squat when I'm doing a squat. Whereas with someone with longer limbs, I'm probably going to go with an interior loaded squat, something like a front squat, a front loaded split squat, or even a Zercher squat, because that helps those people stay more upright when squatting. And that's going to give them a better quads involvement because they need more quads because when you have long limbs, the posterior chain is easier to develop. Whereas when you have short limbs, you're going to squat everything. A deadlift is a squat for you if you have short limbs. But the guy with short limbs will need a heck of a lot more posterior chain work with reverse hypers, maybe even sled work, anything that really target the posterior chain.
Do you think that there's any correlation between long-legged athletes being more elastic?
I believe so. I do believe so. Yes. Again, it's probably like another perfect correlation because as a species, like we have a lot of cross-breathing, right? But yes, I believe that it's been my observation that shorter limbs tend to be more muscular in nature. Well, and it makes sense because you have shorter tendons right from the start, right? Yes, I do believe that it's not a perfect correlation, but it's pretty significant, and that's certainly a clue.
I was even, when you were describing this, I was thinking about, have you ever pitched this or talked to so we've had a couple savage linemen, like big 6'5", 6'6", 6'7" kids, and they actually all have shorter legs, so their center of mass is lower, but a longer torso and long arms, and it's like these guys are perfect O linemen because of their length of their arms, but with the shorter legs, they're able to sit more on it, and it's almost like using that as a guide, like taking your expertise, talking to a football coach and being like, yo, this kid should probably be playing line based off of this stature that we're seeing right now.
Well, you see the same thing. You remember Ed Cohn? Ed Cohn was actually built like that, but like crushed down.
Yeah.
He had like super tiny legs, but super long arms, like built like a gorilla. And that made him perfect for ironically deadlifting and squatting both. Normally you're not built for both, but he was built for both. Mm-hmm. But obviously, like coaches, when it comes to football, they look at long limbs as the be all and all. Okay, and certainly for arm, like wingspan, for offensive linemen, defensive linemen, even receiver, that's a big thing. But I do believe that, again, if you're tall but with shorter legs, it brings your center of mass lower. That's certainly going to be a big advantage for the O-line.
Yeah.
But it's a rare body type, though. It's a rare body type.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. Okay, so let's say that we have a long-legged, elastic athlete. They come to you. They've got 12 to 16 weeks prior to a combine. How would you be setting up, like, let's just say a training split, analyzing their speed, looking at their strength? Maybe their vert's not as good as it needs to be. Maybe they could run a better shuttle. 40's decent. How are you going about that theoretically?
Well, first, just a quick talk about training for a combine. And I know that it's kind of necessary because it can, like it or not, it can affect the rank you're drafted significantly. I mean, you remember like a guy like Artem Archuleta was not on the radar of anybody, but just because he killed the combines, he was a first-round drafter. So that does happen. Just like Maurice Claret, who had a shitty combine performance, he went from like being a first-round hopeful to like being drafted 7th round or something like that. But I believe that the problem is that if you train for the combines, you're not training for football. If you train to so what I would personally me do is, again, same thing. I would train him to maximize him as a football player for most of the probation period. I would include a transfer phase at the end of the training cycle, which would focus on combined performance. But normally, if you train properly, let's say for 12 weeks, you can set up the perfect physiological situation to be great at the combine. It's just a matter of practicing those skills afterwards, right? So I'm just going to explain briefly the typical way I train athletes and how it can veer in different directions depending on what I'm seeing. First, the split I'm using is I like the whole body split for many different reasons. First, you play your sport with every muscle in your body. And when you're practicing your sport, I believe, for example, if you're an athlete, you're not just doing your lifting sessions. You're doing speed work, you're doing agility work, you're doing conditioning work, you're maybe practicing your sport even in the off season. And if you're training, let's say, parts of your body on one day, then you're practicing your sport or doing speed work the next day, you're training with certain muscles fatigued, other muscles not fatigued. So it can change the motor pattern, right? Because if you have some muscles that are more fatigued, the body will try to compensate using other muscle groups. And that can subtly change running pattern, agility drill patterns, skill patterns, stuff like that. But if you have a pretty equal or even fatigue, yes, you're fatigued when you're doing your skills. But because it's an even fatigue, you can maintain the same recruitment pattern. You don't have to compensate because the compensatory muscles also are tired, so you won't compensate. So that's the first reason. Second reason, well, it allows me to train 3 different physical capacities in a week in a very simple manner. I believe that for best results, except for a brief phase where you do complex training and you can combine strength and power together, and I like that, but for maximum development of a capacity, I believe in training that capacity alone or with only qualities that are very close to it in a session. So for example, if I'm training strength speed, I want to train strength speed for the whole session. I'm going to strength another session, and maybe speed strength another session, or reactive strength another session, for example. Okay, I believe that if you give a single stimulus to the nervous system, a singleness of purpose, the adaptations are going to be faster. Okay. Since as an athlete you need to train more than one physical capacity, it just makes sense to have a whole body split where you can train 3 to 5 different physical capacities in your week, depending on how many sessions you have. Let's say you have 3 gym sessions where you could train various spectrum of the strength power spectrum. Then you have 2 more agility, speed, conditioning sessions where you train other physical capacities. Okay, so to me that makes sense. So I have 2 main splits, and that will depend. The one I'm using will depend on the level of development of the athlete. The first one I'm using is a contraction type split. That is used mostly with athletes of, let's say, a lower level of development. Athletes who do need to get a lot stronger. Athletes whose main issue is strength, okay? Because they probably have a lot more experience playing sport, doing sprints than lifting weights. So I like to have Monday is an eccentric focus day. Wednesday is an isometric or statodynamic day. And Friday is a concentric or plyometric day, depending on where we are in the training cycle. Now, these are all 3 capacities are periodized. So for example, on the eccentric day, we will start with a block of slower eccentrics. Now, slow eccentrics, they are kind of controversial nowadays because now people say it's not better for hypertrophy because you're not recruiting the fast twitch fibers because the load is lighter. And I kind of agree with that, but that's not the main benefit of slow eccentrics early on in the training cycle, in my opinion. First, it's going to be better for tendon preparation. Then it's going to be better for movement learning. You can learn and program the motor cortex a movement better when you're doing slow eccentrics. So basically, what I'm saying is the first phase, the accumulation block, is really there to prepare the body for the intense work to come. So slow eccentrics, where you really have to control the movement, they prepare you both technically and physically for the heavy lifting to come. During the second block, we're going to use heavy eccentrics. So we could use, for example, weight releasers to overload the eccentrics. We can use the 2-1 method, where you do the concentric with 2 limbs, the eccentric with 1 limb. Or you could use a 2-movement method, where, for example, I'm going to use a simple exercise. Let's say you do the concentric with a weaker exercise, a stronger exercise, and the eccentric in a weaker exercise. Let's say a curl. You do the concentric with the supinated grip and the eccentric pronated.
Eccentric.
Yeah. So that would be several ways, or we can use manual eccentric overloads. The coach would push down during the eccentric phase. That would be the second block. Third block would be explosive eccentrics. Lots of absorption drills, for example.
What do you term the blocks? How do you call, what do you call the block 1?
I'm old school. I just call them accumulation, intensification, realization.
Okay.
And then during the isometric, there would be the same kind of progression. First would be longer duration, either long duration isometrics, which I really love, like either as loaded stretching or as just positional holds, where you hold key position in your sport. What I like to do is, especially if the athlete comes straight after a season, the muscles that tend to be shortened or used when they are shortening during the season, we want to train them with loaded stretch. And the muscle that tends to lengthen during the sports practice, we want to do them the isometrics more in a contracted position, just to reestablish proper balance. Those need to be of a duration of 2 to 4 minutes, because what we want with those is a structural change in the muscle tissue. And that starts at 2 minutes per set. So we're shooting for 2 to 4 minutes. Other methods we can use would be, for more lifting purposes, would be statodynamic pre-fatigue. So let's say I'm using an exercise like a squat. I'm going to hold the 90 degrees position for 30 seconds. Then we do 5 reps or 6 reps. Okay, just pre-fatiguing a muscle by holding a position, likely the key position in the lift for the athlete. So maybe a position that you're going to find in your sport. So you want to be really strong at that position. And then we're going to use the last block would be isometric explosive. So it can either be second block would be heavy isometrics. I like functional isometrics. So for example, you're loading the barbell on pins and you put a second safety pins maybe 6 inches above. You press against the pins with weights on the bar and you hold 6 seconds against the pins. And using the heaviest weight, you can push for 6 seconds. So that would be functional isometrics. And then for the explosive phase, we're going to use more oscillatory isometrics. So pushing against pins, like for the briefest time possible, then relax. And immediately as you relax, you push again. Like push, relax, push, relax, push, relax. Kind of plyometrics against safety pins. And we do the same thing with the concentric with more volume, then more load, then more explosiveness.
That makes sense. So, okay, so you're doing, let's say, okay, you got the eccentric day, you got the isometric or statodynamic, you got a concentric or plyometric day. If you're prepping someone and they've got to do sprint stuff, where would you put their sprint? Like if they, and even if they could train twice a day or not, would you put them, like, would they sprint before the eccentric workout, or where would you put that in?
I personally prefer to sprint the same days you're lifting if possible. The same reason that Charlie Francis did that is because I don't want 5 days of high neurological demands. I mean, you can train an athlete 5 or 6 days a week, but only 3 of those days can be hard workouts. The other one would be more, I won't call them restoratives because the only way to restore your body is to rest. But certainly like lower demands, like mobility work, like maybe a bit of conditioning, maybe some minor stuff like abdominals, forearms, whatever, or what I call a gap workout, which is hypertrophy for muscles that are holding you back, or that the big lift. Because normally when I train athletes, those 3 big days are using mostly compound movements. They're just because we're training for performance and like normally 4 lifts per workout, covering the whole body. And there might be some muscles because of levers, because of muscle fiber type, because of neurological dominance, whatever, are just not stimulated as well. So you can have a gap workout, which is normally Saturday, where you work strictly for hypertrophy for muscles you need to develop because the main lifts are not developing them properly and they might become a hindrance in the future, or just for visual preferences. I mean, athletes are human beings. I mean, if you look good, you feel more confident, and then you're going to play better. So if you want to put guns there. That's perfectly fine because you need biceps anyway. So that would be more like single joint stuff, hypertrophy stuff, just to build the muscles that are not fully developed with the main exercises.
How do you determine fiber typing, or how do you analyze fiber type?
Dude, that's unless you do a biopsy, I don't believe that there are some things that can give you clues. Okay, for example, like people used to use the 80% reps test. So you use 80% of your maximum, and then you test how many reps you can get. And if you get, let's say, less than five reps or less, you're fast switch dominant. If you get 6 to 12, you're intermediate, or 6 to 10, you're intermediate. More than 10, you're slow twitch dominant. The problem is, first of all, that's kind of a hassle to test every single muscle group that way. And if you use compound movements, you might be limited by one muscle that might be slow twitch, and the other 2 are fast twitch, and they're going to screw everything up. And also training experience make a big difference. I mean, if you've been training with high reps your whole life, you're going to be good at high reps. So you're going to test as if you had higher ratio of slow twitch fibers, which might not be the case. But it gives you one clue. I also like to look at the strategy the athlete uses when jumping. Are they using 2 things? First, do they use a long dips or a short dip instinctively? And is the turnaround between the dip and the projection snappy or slow? I believe that the faster that turnaround is, the more fast switch dominant you are. That would be, but again, it can be a learned behavior. Or it can be the belief that if I Squat down lower, I'm going to jump higher. So that's to be taken into consideration. But it's a clue. It's a clue. Another clue I found is electrostimulation. I found that the more fast twitch you have in a muscle, the more responsive a muscle is to an EMS. So basically, you need less intensity to get a tetanic contraction in the muscle. So, for example, I remember I had a sprint I was training. Did the Olympics like many years ago, and if I used the EMS on his hamstring, like I couldn't even do the warm up intensity because he would cramp. And I had a marathon runner, a triathlete. I could push him to like 600 on the complex, which would like kill an elephant. So I believe that there's a strong correlation, and it would make sense because the fast twitch fibers has a bigger action, so they respond better to the electrical signal. So that would be another clue. But again, these are all clues. There's nothing that is a perfect indication, but there are certainly, when you look at all these clues, it can give you a good idea of the athlete's profile. And again, I believe that an athlete who is elastic in nature is likely going to have a higher ratio of fast twitch fibers. They're also probably going to have a higher level of acetylcholine, which makes them better motor learner. The more acetylcholine you have, the better coordination you have, the easier it is to learn motor skills, and the more transfer you have from one exercise to the other. So, for example, someone with high acetylcholine or someone who learn movements very easily, they can very easily transfer strength gain on an exercise to a similar movement. And they can transfer strength gain in the gym to athletic performance a lot better than someone with low acetylcholine or low motor coordination. Someone who's a motor moron, who takes forever to learn a skill, is likely going to have a lot harder time to transfer the gains made in the gym. He can be strong as a horse. That doesn't mean that it's going to transfer. They probably are going to need a more extensive transfer strategy before the season. They're probably going to need to keep practicing their sports skill as they are gaining strength to more easily transfer the skills to the new body. Whereas someone who is a natural learner, who can learn movement just by looking at, you have guys like that they will look at somebody snatch, and they'll try it, and after 2 attempts, they snatch almost perfectly, right? They can look at you do a golf swing, and they can do it perfectly in like a week. These guys, they maybe don't even need a transfer strategy. They can just go straight from strength and power to performance.
Right in. Yep. Do you think the level of acetylcholine, it's maybe 2 questions here. Is like, do you think that's genetic, or do you think that early exposure, I'm assuming it partially would be, but then my secondary question to that would be like, what if a kid comes in and we get kids like 8, 10.
Yeah.
Your son, I see videos of as well, does a lot of different lifts, a lot of different sports, does martial arts.
Yeah.
You get a kid that maybe genetically aren't predisposed to high levels, but what if their body's adapting prior to puberty with more complex movements? Do you think, and this would be bro science, do you think that they could develop that pathway or that ability to have higher acetylcholine?
Well, when you look at it, acetylcholine is part of the equation, okay? And that's part genetic, and it's part nutritional. Because the higher your diet is in choline food, the more acetylcholine you're going to have. So that's part of
smash raw egg yolks.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. 100%. That would be a big part of it. But there's also the second part is that what acetylcholine does as far as motor learning is concerned is that the reason why there are 2 reasons why people with high acetylcholine are better motor learners. Okay, the first one is that acetylcholine potentiates the mirror neurons. Okay, mirror neurons are the part of your brain that helps you learn by observation. Okay, so essentially the way they discovered more mirror neurons is that they put electrode in the monkey's brain, and they were giving all kind of different stimuli to see which part of the brain would light up. So they would give him a banana. He's looking at a banana, which part of the brain lights up? He grabs it, which part lights up? He tastes it, which part lights up? Then they tried it with a second monkey in front who's only observing the first one. And they noticed that the same part of the brain would light up, plus another area that would always light up. These are the mirror neurons. And that section of your brain is responsible for activating the part of your brain that would activate if you were doing the task that you are observing. Now, the more effective, the more efficient, the better the mirror neurons are, the better you are at learning by observation. Okay? And acetylcholine potentiate the mirror neurons. So that's the first process. Okay? Second, people with very high acetylcholine can act almost when you look at, let's say you look at somebody snatch. Okay? You can actually feel the movement in your body. You feel that this would feel like that. Now, the second reason why acetylcholine can help with learning is that it speeds up the retrieval of stored information. And that's where what you're mentioning comes into play. Okay? It's not that having a wider base of activities that when you're younger gives you more acetylcholine, but it gives you more information to retrieve to create new patterns. Because when you're doing something new, okay, let's say you don't have the luxury of observation, you want to learn something new, the first thing your brain will try to do is, do I have some patterns that already exist that I can use as a starting point? Okay? And acetylcholine would help retrieve that information, and you create new patterns from either that one pattern or combining several patterns that already exist in your brain. Acetylcholine helps with the speed of brain communication and speed of information retrieval. So if you have built a wider base of motor skills as when you were younger, you have these engrams, those programs to pick up from and create new programs, because you probably all have all of those pieces already stored somewhere in some movement. It's just a matter of, okay, I'm going to take that piece from that movement and that piece, it doesn't create my new movement.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
like you're chunking on the fly, basically.
Correct.
Is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then that
to do that.
Yeah, and that would probably lead to better. I guess you would chunk your history together, and then in theory create more myelination through that new motor pattern so that you can execute it faster over time, getting more reps.
Yeah, exactly.
You had mentioned the contraction type split.
Yeah.
What's the second?
The second one
type
is
of
if the athlete already has a pretty strong foundation of strength. Okay, I'm never going to be the coach who tells you that you are strong enough. Okay. That I believe that you can always improve something by getting stronger. It's just a matter of, well, if you are already pretty darn strong, maybe you don't need to spend all of your gym time spent on strength. It's probably better to invest on getting faster with various types of loading, okay? Or more explosive with various types of loading. So if you're strong enough, I prefer to do a split based on physical capacities. And again, depending on the phase, the capacities I'm selecting will vary. So for example, I could have a strength day, I could have a strength speed day, and I could have a speed strength day, for example. I could have a strength day, I could have a reactive strength day, and I could have a strength endurance day, depending on what the athlete needs. But I feel that once the athlete is strong enough, then you have one weekly stimulation to keep improving that strength. But now you have 2 other sessions to focus on other qualities you want to improve the most. So and again, depending on the phase, the quality and on the sport, because some sport do need more strength than others. Some positions do need more strength than others. Like for example, in the sport, I might actually have 2 strength days, but one would be an overload or an accentuation day. So accentuation is what? It's shortened range of motion on exercises, but training the range of motion that is usable in sport. So for example, when you look at a sprinting athlete, a bobsleigh guy, a football player, they rarely need to be strong at the knee angle that is lower than 90 degrees. So accentuation would probably be training the knee and hip at the 90 to 110 degrees, for example. Okay, so half squats, either from blocks, from pins, or just freestanding half squats. Or if someone is dead set on only always doing full squats, you can use chains and bands to increase the resistance in the sport-specific range of motion. But that's what accentuation would be. I like to, and that what it allows you is if you shorten the range of motion, you can use more weight. But you're going to use more weight. Sure, you don't gain strength over the full range, but you're strengthening the range you are using in your sport. In fact, studies have looked at the impact of full squat, half squat, and quarter squat on vertical jump and sprinting, and the partial squats are better than full squats for improving those parameters. Okay, I'm not saying that they're better for athletes. I like full squats to build the structures. But during the accentuation day, once the athlete has built overall strength, then we can focus on adding those partials to maximize the strength in sport-specific range of motion. This can also be done with prowler pushing, for example, which is the joint angle used when you're sprinting. And like you can do it either with very heavy weight or loaded sprints. I don't believe that loaded sprint. I believe that loaded sprints have a bad name because Charlie Francis wrote that if the speed of sprint it decreases by more than 6%, you're going to have a negative transfer on technique. And I believe that it is true for distances above 30 meters because that's when you start to stand up. And when let's say you're adding more weight, you're going to have a longer ground contact time, and you're not going to stand up as much because that's not efficient if you're pulling weight. Mm-hmm. But for 30 meters and less, you actually want that lower angle, you want that longer ground contact time. So loaded sprints for 10, 20 meters are actually a pretty darn good tool. So anyway, accentuation could be done on bench press, could be done on any movement where you need a partial range of motion, like a deadlift from the knees, a high pull from the knees, stuff like that.
Okay, so you're saying, and just for clarity for everybody out there, accentuation is essentially sport-specific range of motion.
Yep.
And then I have this might be a can of worms. This is a discussion that we've been having with our guys on site here. I've had some debates with people. I've gone back and looked through like when you were going off on the isometric stuff, I was really thinking about Anthony Datillo and like how much isometric stuff he would talk about. And I was going through and I'm going, okay. And then one thing I gotta give you, Christian, too, is like you are the absolute best at providing the context to the answer. Like, let me give you context, then I'll give you the answer. So I want to provide some context to this question. Is that if we're looking at something like volume, okay, so volume in the sense is what do you count as volume? And like Datillo was anything at 60% or higher reps times sets. Okay. Chris Beardsley will say volume should only count if it's a set that is within, and this is for his hypertrophy model, would be like effective reps model, and it's within 5 reps in reserve, and then that can be counted. There's varying discussions here. How do you like where? And I've even had the discussion like, does it even freaking matter half the time? Like, but you know, and I'm sure I know it does to a point with higher level athletes. I guess, how do you take that and define volume?
And you know, I don't even think you can do it. I mean, because volume, even with lifting, because you mentioned isometrics. Okay. You don't do reps, you do time. What counts as a rep? What is equivalent when it comes to isometric to 1 rep of lifting? It's if you're doing, and the way you're performing your rep affects many things. Like if you do a rep with a very slow eccentric, okay, even if it's not optimal for hypertrophy, it's still more. It's not more mechanical work in a typical work definition or formula, but you are working for longer, so you're spending more energy, and the nervous system stays activated for longer. And I think that's one thing that for me, people look at volume and they only look at the meat, the muscles. Okay, how much work the muscle is performing, and you and I know that muscles recover super fast. It's the nervous system that's the issue with athletes. I mean, and the volume definition that Chris uses with hypertrophy, that's the one I abide to. Okay, I also focus on how many hard reps you've done, and for hypertrophy, I think that is the proper equation. But when it comes to athletes, that's not the same thing. Because with athletes, it's really the neurological impact, the impact on the nervous system that matters the most. And the way you're performing your reps matters. Like, for example, okay, let's say I'm doing a set of power cleans. I'm probably not doing a single rep that fits Chris Beardsley's idea of a productive rep. For hypertrophy, it's not for hypertrophy, of course. But very rarely, you're never going to do a power clean to failure. Okay, I mean, you're going to miss a little.
Maybe CrossFit.
Yeah.
Well, maybe CrossFit.
Yeah. But then again, it's not even muscle failure. It's just technical failure, or you just cannot produce enough velocity or whatever, right? So you can still move the weight, because in Chris's model, the rep starts to be effective when there's a decrease in the velocity of the rep. Because a decrease in the velocity of the rep would increase tension on the muscle fibers. But when that happens on the Olympic lifts, you miss the lift. So you actually don't get to do any reps that would fit the model. So how do you account for that? Same thing with isometrics. There's zero velocity, so how can you measure velocity decrease?
Same thing even when you were talking. The reason why I started to think through that was you were even talking about, like, okay, with the accentuation aspect, how are you counting a rep on a full range of motion back squat versus a full range of motion squat with change versus a partial range? 100%. And maybe you're looking at a partial range, you got 300K on the bar versus full range, you got 200K on the bar. Like, well, is the rep equal? Like, what's happening? How are you determining that for power? And maybe we need to come up with a power model or an explosiveness model, however you want to term it.
Of course, with the velocity-based stuff, you can actually measure the amount of performance decrement. But to me, I keep it simpler, because it's just a matter of what is the impact of a set on the nervous system, and I count volume really in a number of either sets or reps. But you can use both. I like to use sets. The number of sets that creates neurological fatigue. That fatigue that has an impact on the nervous system. So that could be like a hard set of 5 jumps where you get maximum effort. That's going to have an impact on the nervous system. If you do a heavy lift, even if you have 2 or 3 reps in reserve, that's going to have an impact. If you do a power clean with 80% of your max, that's going to have an impact. So with lifting exercises, I tend to use the Russian model of 80%. I like to count like reps at or above 80%. And you can probably use that with plyometrics in that, or jumps, in that it could be sets where you put at least 80% of your max effort into the jump. That would count. Or if you do a circuit of jumps, anything within 80% of your best performance would count as a set, for example.
So you almost would measure, like, let's just, for easy math here, you're looking at a broad jump, and you got somebody that's got a 3-meter broad jump, which would be sick. And you're looking at, they're pretty explosive shot putter or somebody. And then it would be, okay, let's take off about, 30, 60 centimeters off. So now that broad jump in training, we're going to go to 220 to 240 is the range.
And that's something that very few people do, right? I mean, let's say you're lifting. Or you're always lifting your max on a lift, unless you're Bulgarian. You do plenty of sets. I mean, I would estimate that the average intensity is around 75-80%. Most of the time, if you look at the yearly average. And if you do a bodybuilding set, do you take every single set to muscular failure? Not always. Okay, so why are you jumping with maximum effort all the time? I'm not saying that you do need maximum intent jumps from time to time, but they need to be periodized. Of course, but to me, I think that this is best done by using different types of jumping. So when you're doing, let's say, a broad jump or a vertical jump, which is a low skill jump and a low volume jump because you don't do many reps in a set, then you focus on maximum intent all the time. But these would not be the bulk of your explosive work. Just like depth jumps would not be the bulk of your explosive work. Loaded jump squats would not be the bulk of your explosive work. These would be, you would periodize to get there at the end of your training cycle, for example. But most of the volume work would be done on exercises that by nature requires you to keep something in the tank. Like when you do side-to-side jumps. I mean, you can't do maximum, the pace is going to be horrible. When you do jump series, you also want to spend less time on the floor, so automatically you cannot apply maximum force. So I think that those sets automatically allow you to do the 80% work. I would probably not, today we're going to do vertical jump at 80%, maybe for warm-ups. But when you do a simple jump, I believe that you should probably train it with maximum intent all the time.
Yeah, okay. That helps with that explanation. I was even thinking, even with the Beardsley model, I think it probably is one of the best takes on volume, honestly.
Yeah.
But it's even like I was thinking about Dorian Yates, and I brought out his book, and I went back through his book on, it's like Train to Be a Warrior or something. It's sick. It's just like crazy meathead stuff. But it's like even his 2, 3, 4 sets leading into his death set where he would just go till he dies. He would leave 5 to 10 reps left in the tank. So are we not going to count his first 4 sets before he does his crazy intense, his intensity stuff? And I think that's where there's such a gray area along the lines. And
that's the limitation of the Beardsley model. And I think that even Chris has kind of changed his tune a bit on that topic, that even sets that are performed with more than 5 reps in reserve still have somewhat of a training effect. Granted, it's going to be mostly on the slow twitch fibers. So sure, they don't have that much growth potential, but you still have a training effect. Even if it's just neurological, you become more efficient in the movement. So certainly these reps do have an impact, but it's super small compared to those last 5 reps. But for hypertrophy, I believe that this is the proper model to use.
How do you differentiate? And this is where when I watch your stuff on YouTube, and I have read in the past, and growing up on T Nation and just watching everything that you did in T Nation back in the day as well, it's like, how do you differentiate, or how do you identify when you're going to select a specific tactic of some type of strategy? I'm thinking about when you were describing, you have your accumulation. It could be almost and this is where maybe you can correct me, but I'm looking at accumulation is you might be doing traditional baseline movements, and then intensification we might be doing. That's where these unique tactics that you see of like pushing down on the eccentric and things like that. And I guess I watch stuff like that, and it's how do you know when someone needs a 1-6 method, or a pre-fatigue that's isometric, or a pre-fatigue that is, related to, I was thinking about this on your gap day, pre-fatigue work or isolation work. How do you know when, or maybe it's even better if you look at what are the most consistent strategies you're using to manipulate a rep?
Well, again, it depends on what you want. Okay, and you really need to ask yourself, what do I want to take out of for my training? What do I want the training to create? I want to get stronger, sure, but how? I want to get bigger, sure, but how? What do you want to correct? What do you want to improve? So, for example, let's look at something like pre-fatigue isometrics. Okay, so let's say I'm training an athlete. So sure, gaining muscle is nice, but it's not the main goal. So why would I use pre-fatigue isometrics on a squat, on a deadlift, on a bench, or whatever? To me, it's, again, to be really, really good at the movement. First, it allows you to get strong in a key position of that lift that might eventually, when we're going to lift heavy, be the weak point. So you actually, I prefer to try to fix the problem before it shows. So if I know that, okay, this, because this arm length or whatever, or because I've seen him bench or I've seen him squat, or as an athlete, this position, this angle is where I want to be strongest. Or this is where I might need to gain strength in the future because it's going to hold me back. So the pre-fatigue will help me do that. I can also use the pre-fatigue as a strategy to improve motor recruitment. For example, let's say that I have an athlete who has a really hard time activating their glutes, okay? And we all know how glutes are important in pretty much all sports. Well, you can do let's say a hip thrust, which I don't like normally, but for that specific purpose, it would be a good exercise. And you hold the top position, the contracted position, for 20 seconds, squeezing the glutes as hard as you can. Kind of telling your brain, when I'm doing that pattern, this is the muscle I want to use. Okay, and then you do your reps, and you're going to feel that muscle better. People poo-poo on mind-muscle connection. Well, when you're trying to learn to do an exercise properly, it's kind of nice to know if the muscles you're trying to target are doing the work. So that offers you feedback right from the start. If I'm looking at the slow eccentrics, for me, it's mostly a matter of first to make sure that I can fully control all the points in the range of motion. But also I use it as a diagnostic tool. And you know this from training explosive athletes, the main strategy with athletes when they have a weak point, either during the eccentric or concentric, is to speed through that position. Either they will go down fast so that they don't have time to have a positional change, or they try to explode before the point, the weak point, to create momentum to be able to go through that point. Okay, so speed masks weaknesses. So doing the slower eccentrics at first, or even a slower concentric in some cases, with a pure beginner, I could actually use slower concentric just for technical learning perspective. But slower movements will help me figure out where they are the weakest. And once I know that, that's going to impact my assistance exercise strategy. One thing I took out from when training at Dave Tate's place, okay, they were all doing the same main lift, okay, and they were competing. They were like 5 guys on a squat platform and going up to like 900 pounds. And then afterwards, what they did, they all got together and they said, well, I noticed in your squat, your hips were shooting up too fast and you were leaning forward. You should probably work on this muscle. And I noticed that you were having problem out of the hole. You probably should train that muscle. And they decided which exercises to use for the assistance work there. They didn't pre-plan them. They knew they would have like 3 assistance exercises. But which one depended on the squat performance? What do I need to fix? Well, I can use methods to do that, or I can use methods that will help me fix a problem. If they have positional weaknesses, like they don't lack strength, but for some reason, at one point in range of motion, it all goes to shit. They lose stability. So do I need to use an unstable exercise? Do I need to use functional isometric at that angle? Because that's one thing with isometrics. Isometrics, especially high-intensity isometrics, tend to increase the recruitment of both the antagonist muscles and the synergistic muscles. That creates stability. So if you are, for example, let's say you have someone who has a weak bench press near the lockout, okay? Let's say the last third of the movement. Most people will say triceps. Yeah, but what if the athlete has super strong triceps? What's them?
What if they're benching like this?
Yeah.
And they can't lock out and they're here because they're not like this.
Yeah. Again, my point is that most of the time it's actually either shoulder instability, or they don't have the strength or the technique to maintain the proper mechanics. So in that case, the solution is not triceps work. It's to select a method that will increase the stability of the shoulder. It could be hanging band technique. It could be isometrics, really focusing on keeping that position back. Because that's the cool thing with isometrics. Isometrics allow you, because there's no movement, to really zoom in, focusing on perfect position. Okay, that's why I call it positional strength training. And the cool thing is that even with maximum effort isometrics, you can still focus on maintaining perfect posture.
Yeah.
So when the problem is that when you get out of position, then training the position is probably the right strategy. So it's just a matter of, okay, why do I have a problem? Which method would fix that? And of course, you need to understand the effect of the method. So that's why, for example, when I'm mentoring a coach, okay, because I'm mentoring several coaches, one thing I ask them to do is to create a list of all the training methods they know, okay? And they probably, I'm going to probably have them either classify them. Normally, I classify them by eccentric, isometric, concentric, because that's the way I work. And then with each method, I have a reflection of why does it work? Not just what does it train? Why is it effective? What is the effect? And as much detail as possible, and you create a book like that. So when you need something, you can look at, okay, I need to work on positional strength. This is the method. So that's the way I select methods.
I think that's, even when you were explaining that, it's like we'll do pause in the split, like for weightlifters.
Yep.
Actually, we'll even do this with shot putters, where we'll go, if I have a shot putter who's fouling, you're right, they're going out of the circle, we'll hit behind the neck jerks, pausing in the split for 4 seconds. And what I see, and I think you're explaining this through the adaptation, is like they get a greater co-contraction in the hip or the knee or the shoulder. And it's like once that co-contraction is actually working the best it can, now they're more stable, so they can produce more force to control and then eventually get stronger.
Exactly. Correct. And even like with weightlifting, one thing I like to use when I'm teaching the lifts is pausing when you're catching the weight. I mean, especially with athletes who tend to do a CrossFit catch. You know, like they look like a starfish, like fully extended, like leaning back, and the knees are fully extended. You need to catch in the athletic position. So to me, I'm pausing when you're catching the bar. Now, how are you in the athletic position when you caught that bar? No, I'm too high. Well, squat down, hold the athletic position 5 seconds. Then on the next rep, try to copy that position. Now, if you felt the position, it's easier to get there than just following instructions. And then they will hold the position for 3 seconds. So to me, that's a pretty good way to learn the proper body positions. And again,
so if you're looking at if you're looking at like a squat, like you got a long-legged athlete, they suck at mid-range. You would essentially maybe do some iso holds or eccentric to iso, and then maybe the next phase, like you're basically setting up, like some people might, and I'm sort of rambling here, but some people might set up progressions from squat to goblet squat to zombie squat to front squat, and they might look at that in a micro setting, and one day this is a progression. But you're almost then taking that and saying like, okay, I can take that exact same progression that we just created and establish an iso progression off of phases.
One method I like to use, and I use that, granted, with two types of people: either beginners, or people with a mechanical issue with the lift, or people who have anxiety at the thought of adding more weight to the bar, which is probably, well, you're going to have some athletes who don't want to lift heavier, like they are, like, I know, basketball players. Anyway,
baseball players,
yeah, I don't want to be, all the risk-averse athletes out there, right? Ice skill hockey players are the same way. So I call it the fixed weight progression model. So you are basically using the whole weight for, let's say, let's do a 6-week cycle, but it can actually be extended to 12 weeks if you really wanted to, or shortened to 4 weeks if you want to. So during the whole cycle, let's say the whole block, using the same weight, but you change the condition of the reps. And each week you are making the condition harder, okay? So even if you're not increasing the weight, you're working harder to do the same weight. So let's say the first week would be a normal rep, okay? So let's say 2 seconds down, 1 second up. Then the second week, you're going to use a slow eccentric. Let's say 5 seconds down. Third week, you're going to have an isometric hold at the midpoint during the eccentric. And then you squat back down and you stand up. Then the next week, you're going to have a pause, but this time it's during the concentric. So you do a normal eccentric, you lift up all the like halfway up. At the halfway point, you hold, and then you finish your lift. Last week, you do a pause, both during the eccentric and during the concentric. Okay. So essentially, each week you're working harder for this, and you keep the reps and the load the same. So you're working harder and harder and harder, so you are getting stronger from week to week, but mentally you're using the same weight. But the side benefit of that is that you get a lot better motor learning. So once after the cycle, you go back to squatting normally. Let's say you put 10 Ks more on the bar. It feels a lot easier than what you just did. Mentally, it's easier.
Right. Okay. Okay. I wanted to ask a question before but when we close out, I wanted to ask some questions around simple stuff like books or just throwing random stuff at you. But I wanted to ask a question like, how are you looking at a split? We get asked this a lot. We work with a lot of wrestlers as well, so it's like, how would you set up a split for, let's say, a wrestler, and would it still be that same type of setup versus, and maybe it's even the exercises versus somebody who is an endurance-based athlete like a marathoner or like a triathlete or a long-distance swimmer? How would you look at that?
It's with wrestlers. I like to use I like the contraction type split because I believe that for wrestlers the eccentric and isometrics are undertrained, but they are super important in the performance of your sport. I believe that's so that would be the split I'm probably going to be using most of the time. And then the main difference really is going to be as far as a matter of exercise selection. I mean, I believe that lifting, the specificity is mostly in energy systems training and the explosive work you're doing. But you can still bias the lifts towards stuff that will have a greater chance of transferring positively. Like for squatting, I love the Zercher squat. I love the Zercher lunge. These are, or the Zercher split squat, two great exercise for wrestlers. With wrestlers, during the concentric day, I will do a lot of loaded carries. First, because, they're awesome, but also because it's more specific to wrestling. Like, especially Zercher carry, that would be awesome. Farmer's walk, I mean, you cannot have hands that are too strong. So the concentric day, what would be a lot. I worked with a judo guy who made silver at the Olympics from France, and that's what we did. The strength workout was essentially loaded carries. Also, the risk of injury is much lower than if you do a max deadlift. And as you posted yourself in the video, you're just one bad deadlift rep away from being off from training. And personally, I don't use the regular deadlift with athletes. I will use Romanians. But I never use the traditional. I might use trap bar from time to time, but I never use the traditional deadlift with athletes. I mean, we clean, we snatch. That's what we do with that kind of pull. But I like the Zercher squat. I like loaded carries. But besides that, I still apply the same logic. It's just I might slant the exercise selection more toward what they need. It's really the conditioning session that might change. Like, for example, I might do strongman medleys I found very effective. Like what I do is take 3 exercises as a circuit done from between 1 minute to 1 minute and 30 seconds each as a circuit. Then you're going to rest for the same time you spend during the circuit. So if you work for 3 minutes, you rest for 3 minutes. So it could be something like Zercher carry for a minute. Then it would be, let's say, farmer's walk for a minute. Then it would be prowler pushing for a minute. Or one would be very specific to wrestlers. You would do, let's say, low position prowler pushing for a minute. You would do Zercher carries or Zercher lunges for a minute. And then you do bear crawls for a minute, for example.
Okay. How do you work with somebody who's like let's just go a little bit into a marathon triathlon? Is it just like, is it as intense and as focused as these other sports, or is it more like, we're just gonna have you lift twice a week and make sure you don't die?
I think that I think that if anything, they would need the slow eccentrics and isometrics the most because they are gangly and unstable. And basically, when you're running a marathon, essentially you learn to minimize energy expenditure for movement. So it's almost like how kettlebell competitors lift. It's like there's zero contraction in their whole body. They stay, they like loose and relax because they don't want to spend extra energy for no reason. Well, marathon runners tend to be like that because when you're running, you did like little hands going like this because everything is soft because you want to minimize. Well, it's because you want to minimize muscle tension. Okay, so that produces less CO2, so less oxygen depth, better, easier to perform. The problem is that that's a learned behavior. So when they lift like that. So they have no stability. That's why they do these itsy bitsy, like 1/4 range of motions because they are afraid, but they are also too unstable to do full squat properly. But I think that of all the people, they are the ones who would benefit the most from the slow eccentrics, the isometrics, just to work on creating that stability. Also, that I think that the fixed weight progression model is great for marathon runners because they are risk averse. They absolutely hate lifting. Normally,
they don't want to get big.
They don't want to get big. They don't want to have to wait to the bar. So yeah.
Okay, I want to close this out then. Where it's like I share some of your old school books here, like this. This you can't see this one, and I like to, and we got the Black Book of Secrets, that one as well. You've got a newer one I think as well, if I remember. And I wanted to pull from you what are like 1 or 2 or 3 books, whatever, 1 or 2 books that you always are like, you got to start here, you got to read this, because we get messages a lot from younger kids trying to get into strength and conditioning. They're like, where can I start?
That's a really bad question because I must confess I haven't read a book in a long time and I just don't have the time. I used to have this huge collection of books, right? Like 300 of them when I was in St. Louis. And when I decided to leave, I left because I wanted to ask my wife to marry me. So I left like a savage. Like I'm leaving a note. I'm going back to Canada. See ya. And I just filled my car with as much stuff as I could, and I just drove 23 hours to Canada. And I left all my books there. But because the one I like, the one that really changed my perspective of training, they might not be easily accessible to most people because they are probably either in German or in French. The best one I've read is by Jürgen Weineck. It was a translation called Manuel d'entraînement, or in German it was Training Optimalis by Jürgen Weineck. And that's essentially where my training model comes from, the eccentric, isometric, concentric. I have 3 sources for that model. The first one is the book by Jürgen Weineck, but then again, the chapter on strength training explained Jean-Pierre Heger's model, which you obviously know because he was training Werner Gunther.
Yep.
Yeah. So that was my second source of information, the work of Jean-Pierre Heger. And my third one was by a French sports scientist that you might actually find translation of by Gilles Cometti. So Cometti, Cometti. So again, that's all his books were about eccentric, isometric, concentric, plyometric methods. So that's where it comes from. That these books I read in college, they changed the way I program forever. So I would say that personally, these were the books that had the greatest impact on my own training.
Okay, one thing off of that. Have you ever done in training the 3-7 method from Gunther's coach? It's like, I asked Dave Tate, and I said, dude, you get 70% of your let's say bench press, okay? 70% of your bench.
Yeah.
You do a triple,
yeah.
You rest 15 seconds, you do a set of 4, 15 seconds, set of 5, 15, set of 6, 15, set of 7, 15, rest 2.5 minutes, repeat. And it's taken, so we've been on this right now for 8 weeks. It took 6 weeks for 2 of our shot putters to hit it. Because I was like, all right, we're just going to do this in the fall and see what happens. Yeah. And it's freaking absolutely, it's horrible. But for like it's funny because for me, it's like, yo, if I want to go down and train and get a 20-minute workout in, and I do the 3-7 method, and then I go do some T-bar rows, I feel like an absolute savage. But I wanted to see if you've ever used a method like that.
You know what? That's literally the first workout I'm going to be doing when my home gym is done.
All right, literally. That's perfect.
But I think that it's funny because that's the kind of workout that if you give to a powerlifter, a thrower, an Olympic weightlifter, it's going to kill them. It's going to take weeks for them to be able to do it. You give that to a speed skater, it's going to be an easy workout. It's going to be an easy workout.
I think, and I've been on your site, and I did want to ask you a little bit of like typing, but we have like a way that we type athletes, and it's funny because the typing that we use to gauge our athletes, you can literally see to a T the psychological state of the athlete, like the type of person they are on the first day that they do the 3-7 method and they fail.
Really?
And it's like somebody who's a Zen type guy is just like, well, it's a really hard workout and I'm not trained this way.
Yeah.
Someone who's a meathead, they're like throwing shit against the wall. Yeah. So it's funny.
That reminds me, I'm known for throwing stuff in the gym. I remember that was years ago. I was training. I was still an Olympic weightlifting back then, and I was doing a snatch session, and I was pulling everything forward. Like everything was forward. I was getting frustrated. I was getting freaking pissed off. So I'm going to just start over again. You're just going to start my warm up, like 50 kilos power snatches. So as I'm doing my warm up, I'm still fuming. The agent for the hockey players I'm training comes in. He wants he brings a new player in so that I can meet him. And he's just, hey Chris, how are you doing? While I'm doing my set. I'm like going my snatch here. I'm looking at him and I threw the bar on the wall. And then I turned around like smiley face. Yeah, Paul, how's it going? And then he just said, well, I told you it was special.
Yeah, that's funny. Hey, share before you get off the. Wasn't there an exorcism story?
Yeah.
That you have.
Yeah. Was training at the gym I was training at bock then was in the basement of a church, and it was.
I actually think that you have pictures in this book
if you look at the first 2 books, the Black Book of Training Secrets and Theory and Application of Modern Strength Power Method, it's in that gym. Yes.
Yeah. You can see. Yeah. Okay.
Across on the wall. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that was literally the most awesome place I've trained in, just because of the guys who trained there. Like we were like a super small town, but we had like, I kid you not, at least 12 guys bench pressing 400. We had several guys deadlifting, but all the strong men, because the gym was a community project. And they gave the project to a friend of mine who was a member of the national lifting team in 82. He competed against Riegert and guys and Blagoyev and guys like that. It was probably the worst snatch to clean and jerk ratio I've ever seen. He had the Canadian record for the 82 kilo class with 192 kilos, and he was snatching 115. And that's crazy. And he was military pressing 135 pounds or 155 pounds. And he was jerking like 192. It's crazy.
Holy shit.
Anyway.
That's insane.
So he was handling the project, and he brought all the lifters. He was training like power lifters, strongman, weightlifters, and I brought all the hockey players and football player I was training. But the thing is, it was an awesome gym. But on the weekends, I couldn't drop the bar. We couldn't drop the bar because there was a service upstairs, and because the way that a church is built, it's like an echo chamber. It amplifies everything that goes downstairs. So if you drop the bar, it sounds like there's an earthquake upstairs, right? And on a Wednesday morning, I come in, and the guy who's taking over the gym that day, who was a boxing coach anyway, he said, Chris, you cannot drop the bar today. I said, why the hell not? We're Wednesday. There's no church. Is there a wedding? There's no wedding in the winter. And no, there's an exorcism going on. What? You're kidding me, right? And he's laughing. So, okay, that's a joke. So I go upstairs, and there's this young lady like shaking on the ground with three priests like throwing holy water on her. Like, I can imagine like dropping a bar, and the priest goes, "Satan, get out of his body." Boom! I guarantee that like 3 heart attacks right there. It was
Yeah,
pretty awesome.
that's
Like we
funny.
had like the Atlas stone up to 500 pounds in aluminum. Like
Holy
that's like
shit.
25,000 each. That was a sponsored thing that they had. We had a Viking press, which was unheard of at the time. We had a whole room to do with carries. I mean, that was like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. We were doing sled pulls like before it was a thing. It was absolutely amazing.
Yeah. All right. I appreciate this a lot, Christian, and let everybody know where can they find you
Well,
and what new stuff you have.
just basically Tib Army, man. If it's to
Yeah.
social media, it's all Tib Army. Very easy to find. Um, Besides that, I'm working on a new project. I mean, I'm working on a course, online course on pro longevity training. And really, what I believe is that as you're getting older, the key to longevity is to maintain or improve all the physical capacities that you lose when you're getting older. So essentially, it's training like an athlete because
Hmm.
people are like, well, I'm gonna take it easy, do some light bodybuilding stuff. Sure, you're gonna maintain your muscle mass, but you also lose speed, you lose strength, you lose agility, you lose mobility, you lose endurance. You want all of that as you're getting older. Anyway, the course will explain all of that. So I'm rehabbing my shoulder. I tore two rotator cuff muscles in my left shoulder. It's still working on that. Besides that, it's all good.
Okay, let me ask you a question regarding that longevity before we get off then. If I'm trying to increase like my VO2 max,
Yep.
I want to run faster
Mhm.
and I want to maintain like my I want to I last year when I turned 40, I still had like a 31 and a half vert and I'm like, you know what, if I could just keep that till I'm like 45, I'll be happy. What would you recommend training wise? Or do I got to just get the course?
No, no. Well, but that's why I like that. That's why I like whole body training because you can
Yeah.
have each. Let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You focus on one specific physical capacity that is strength related. And on, let's say, Tuesday and Thursday or Tuesday and Sunday, you can focus on a physical capacity that is more energy based, or it can be agility, it can be your endurance running. I would do endurance running on a day that you're not lifting afterwards because it can cause central fatigue. So that would probably be on a Saturday, and yeah, I would maybe cycle the physical capacities or the task you're focusing on each block. So
Okay.
list all the things you want to maintain, and for each block you focus on three of them, and you rotate. You rotate.
Okay.
You might
Okay.
rotate like three. You might have like nine. So for a block of 12 weeks, you focus on not 4 weeks, a block of let's say 6 weeks. You focus on three of them. Then for the next 6 weeks, three new ones. Then three new ones, and you go back to the first ones. Or you can do what a
Okay.
good friend of mine. That's something that I've always found pretty interesting. A friend of mine who is what I would call an older gentleman, but now he's probably like he's like I wouldn't say pushing 60, but pretty close. And he looks just as good as when he was 35. But again, he looked like shit when he was 35. No, no, I'm kidding. He was a great athlete, great athlete. I mean, at 55, he's more athletic than anybody you can find. Like he's strong, he's powerful, he looks jacked. And what he does is he has seasonal training. So the best way I can explain it is like during the summer, you train like a sprinter. During
Okay.
the autumn, you train like a shot putter or a weightlifter or a bobsleigh guy.
Just get
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
During the winter, you train like a powerlifter. And during the spring, spring, you train like let me get back. Summer, it's like a sprinter. Spring is like a shot putter. Winter is like a powerlifter. And autumn is like a bodybuilder.
Okay.
And you always keep
And
the
then
foundation of endurance stuff in there.
okay, and that's what I was going to ask you is like, are you still like I've popped in? I haven't like every once in a while you would do lives on Instagram, and I would go in and you'd be on like a treadmill doing
Yep.
stuff. Is that like something that you do
You're
consistently
right.
still,
You're right.
or
You're
okay?
right. If it's not on a treadmill, I do walks with a loaded backpack or
Okay.
jogs. Yeah, it's
Okay.
near. I just it's an intensity level that does not interfere with my workouts. Like if I put, let's say, a 30-pound weight vest and I go hiking for an hour, it's not going to hurt my workouts at all. But it maintains a pretty decent like zone 2 cardio ish kind of adaptation, which allows me to, if I want to push my VO2 max, I can do that in 4 weeks.
Right. Right. Okay. Are you still, one more question? Are you still doing the snatch high pulls? Because I think that there's this video of you with like 4
400.
blues doing snatch high pulls, and your freaking traps were so
Yeah.
jacked, and I'm like, that video is like emblazed in my head
I
of
actually
like,
posted it yesterday, I think, in my video on Instagram.
wait, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Shit, that's funny.
It's I can't because of my shoulder right now. I mean,
Okay.
it's getting better, but when I tore my supra and infraspinatus, so it's
Okay.
like lifting my shoulder. It's functional, it's just super weak. But yeah, we're still doing it. I mean, it's
Yeah. Okay.
that hypo has a funny story behind it. I was at the T Nation gym, and I was doing high pulls, and I was like 100 kilos on a bar, maybe 120 or something like that. And
That was when you still had a Peyton Hillis jersey
Peyton Hillis
too, or
jersey.
something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I still have it, but there's no number anymore on it.
Okay.
Washed out. And then so the owner of T Nation comes in and looks at me lift and said, "Dude," he doesn't say "dude," but then that's an awesome movement. I mean, it's violently explosive, but it's not super technical. So most people can learn to do that. I mean, it would be really cool if we filmed something really impressive, like 400 pounds. Like, you know that I only have like 110 kilos on the bar right now, and I've never done 140 kilos before, 180 kilos before, even when I was snatching 140. So
Yeah.
it would be really cool. Like, do you want a paycheck if we film 180? So for the next 3 weeks, all I'm doing is high
This
pull.
is high pull.
Every day, twice a day. Sometimes low pulls to create an overload. Okay, just like
Yeah.
180 on there, just putting it as high as I could. Now, the day has come. I mean, today we're going to film, right? But up to that point, I didn't go higher than 160. So I'm going to say, well, I need some boost, right? So when I wake up, I took their energy drink, which has like a humongous amount of caffeine, but also yoembine and ephedrine. Now, you don't combine yoembine and ephedrine because one is a gas pedal, the other one cuts the brake line. So you can actually get your heart rate up to 400 if you want. Anyway, so I'm doing that and I'm shaking. Can we go? Can we go? And I'm in my office and we're not going yet. I said, no, I cannot come down. I cannot come down. So I'm popping like 2 ephedrine pills and one more drink. And I'm like mainline and I can barely move. Yeah. So I said, now we're going to film. I needed to do breathing exercises between every set to calm myself down. Now, when I hit the 180, I honest to God thought that I might die that day because my heart, and I had cramps in my heart. So I went back home. My wife was still in Canada. I called her up. Said, honey, I snatched grip high pull 180, but I might die tonight. I just wanted to let you know that. But she had no idea what a snatch grip high pull was or what 180 was. Anyway, but I lived. But I never, after that, done that 180. I was able to get back to 170. I was never able to get back to 180.
Okay. That's good. Christian, thanks for sharing these stories and thanks for helping out with everything. And everybody head over to tibarmy.com and check him out on Instagram. And thanks again.
Appreciate it, sir.
All right. Peace.
Take care.